Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Laura. I'm honored to be presenting for the Work Wellness Institute on the future of work and disruption in the workplace today and what it means for mental health and well-being. And most importantly, how workplaces need to adapt to the challenging times and opportunities that we're in. So today I'm going to talk to you about my vision for the future of work and how I came about visioning how the future would go, and a bit about who I am. Then I'm going to talk to you about the current context and opportunity organizations are facing, the world is facing, and human beings are dealing with. And then I'm going to talk about why organizations must adapt to strong and successful hybrid leadership in order to thrive in a flexible, productive workplace. So as an organizational psychologist, I spent a lot of my career working with organizations on how to make them better. But I first got into psychology when I did a master's degree in counseling back in the late 90s. And I wanted to be a counseling psychologist and help people and help their careers, because people spend a lot of time in their work and careers. And I knew back at that time, 25 years ago, that career was a very important part of our identity, and it could make or break our feeling of well-being and how happy and satisfied we were. So that's what I started in, but then I ended up, as careers go and pivot, doing a doctorate in organizational psychology after I had worked myself on teams back in the late 90s and early 2000s that were what I call distributed or virtual, where we were in different locations from one another. And I believed at that point that there was a better way of working. So I found myself teleworking some of the time, and realizing that I didn't thrive going into an office every single day, nor did I need to. So when I embarked on my doctoral research, I decided I would look at what makes leaders successful leading from a distance and how we can have high-performing teams when people are separated or working apart from one another in different locations. And then I got involved in the whole notion of telework and how we could get cars off the road and help people lead healthier, more well lives by not having to commute 5 days a week and work in an office cubicle full time. So this is interesting. This was my research back in the early 2000s, where we looked at video conferencing in a lab at the University of Calgary, and we studied team dynamics and team performance when you're working through video conferencing technology. So what does this remind you of? Zoom. I was studying Zoom back in 2003 and the impacts on leaders and teams. Fast forward 5 years later, in 2008, this book came out called Growing the Virtual Workplace, which I co-authored with 3 business school professors, and we looked at what are the impacts on human beings of telework. What are the impacts on leaders, on organizations, and on cities? So what I loved about this book was it looked at the macro impacts, the impacts on society, on pollution, on traffic congestion, all the way to the impacts on the individual human being. And at that time, we had just so much fun collecting data on personality of remote workers and teleworkers, which I'll tell you a little bit about as we go on here. So fast forward to 2014, we had created the first remote personality profiler. So a tool that would assess someone's fit for working remotely versus in an office. And that tool was profiled in Scientific American magazine in 2016. That's at the bottom right there. It was the first of its kind, which ended up bringing us to South by Southwest, the Mega Innovation Conference, where we presented, my business partner, Dr. Tom O'Neill, and I at the time, we presented on this whole notion of distributed work, hybrid work. It wasn't called hybrid at the time, that's a newer term, but it was the idea of how we lead, how we perform when we're working apart from one another. So that's a little bit about my history. I'm an innovator, I'm an organizational psychologist, and I founded the largest team of career psychologists in Canada as well. So I'm very close to what makes people tick at work and what makes them miserable, stressed, and suffering at work. So the current context that we're facing as society, as we are post-pandemic now, but we are still reeling from the effects of the pandemic, is that there's challenges coming at us from all directions. We have economic uncertainty, we have inflation, economic volatility, fears of a recession. All of this is impacting people. In addition, we have global unrest going on with the war. We have polarization that only got worse during the pandemic and continues to be very polarized. In most parts of the world, there's various forms of polarization going on, including our own country. And then at the same time, we have the Great Resignation, which I like to refer to as the Great Reevaluation. What do I want to be when I grow up? What do I want to do at all ages? We've seen people move locations. We've seen people move careers altogether. We've seen people who are fed up with working in toxic organizations. I've seen so many of these situations, more than ever before. And at the same time, consulting to organizations, we're hearing their pain about the talent shortage, how to retain people, how to hire people. It's very difficult in those respects. And we hear a lot about mass layoffs happening, especially in tech lately. But the fact of the matter is unemployment is low. Unemployment is very low, and people are getting scooped back up into other roles. But it's very much, in a lot of ways, still an employees market, and we've got to be very, very careful of that. As organizations, in doing the best we can to engage and retain talent and double down on culture. There's also the rapid pace of unpredictability, the rapid pace of technological change, AI happening. There's just more change than ever before in our lives, in our work. We call it VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So there's a lot of that going on. So all of these challenges are stressful when they all happen at the same time, and when people are living in stress and fear as a result of these challenges. Fear and stress end up taking their toll on us as human beings. In addition, work-life overload is massive. Work and life have both become more complex than ever, and as a result, people are just feeling overloaded. These things lead to mental health challenges of various sorts. Although this presentation isn't all about mental health is a part of it. And with the Work Wellness Institute, I think how we can make organizations and workplaces healthier and the human beings within, most importantly, because that's what organizations are. They're groups of human beings. So when we have the uncertainty in our lives and it's ongoing and we don't see a light at the end of the tunnel with that, we end up fueling more and more mental health challenges, which unfortunately, for the last 20 plus years in psychology, I've seen them higher than ever before right now. And what concerns me most of all is that young people, teens and early 20s, are suffering more than they've ever suffered before. So as the mother of 3 teens myself, and as someone who's very concerned about, the future generation, I think we need to really, really get under this and ahead of it, because the current situation has some concerns. 30% of Canadians, which is a lot, it means that you know someone, either yourself, your partner, your brother, your sister, your cousin, your friend, your neighbor. You know someone who has had a major anxiety or depression, not just feeling down for a few days. I mean, a major anxiety or depression hit them since the onset of COVID. This is a 6% increase from pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, it wasn't all roses and unicorns either, and I'm going to get to that, but it's gotten worse. And 1 in 3 Canadians who have sought help, 14 and over, have found that their needs weren't fully met by the help. So I think that we have more sources of help than ever before, but are the ways of helping enough? And are they being fully utilized, etc.? Those are a bunch of question marks. Over 4,000 Canadians die by suicide each year. That's 11 a day. And if anyone's been impacted by suicide in their lives, I lost a dear friend to suicide. It was 2017. She was 39 years old. And I would say the impacts of that on her family, on her partner at the time, on close friends, it was significant. So I think suicide to me is the extreme terrible outcome of all of this, which is why we need to make this situation better and do everything we can. And work, like I said, why I went into workplace psychology is because work occupies a lot of time. It's a lot of our waking hours. And it's a lot of our identity, because if I ask you, hey, what's your name? My name's Tim. What do you do, Tim? It's always about what you do. You're asked about your job. It's a part of who you are. And our time at work can support us as a whole human, or it can deny us that support, or it can contribute to mental unwellness. And your direct supervisor, your boss, is a huge contributor one way or another to this, as is your boss's boss, who has a lot of impact on how leadership goes, and your team around you. So I like to say that organizations need to be human-centric. They need to look at the whole human being, and the fact of the matter is they don't have robots working for them. They might have AI, but they have human beings as well. The AI doesn't have to be treated like a human, but the human has to be treated as a human being, not a human doing. So a human being means that humans need to be well in order to be at their best. So we're not computers that are left plugged in, we're rechargeable batteries. We need to refuel ourselves. And I don't like the term balance, because balance implies a perfect balance, and it implies a compartmentalization between work and the rest of life. But what that has led to is that don't bring your problems to work. You're not a human being at work, you are a resource. And I think that's a fundamental problem, and it impacts people's joy, their satisfaction, their engagement, their identity, their motivation, and it ultimately is not good for the company either. It's not good for the bottom line. So if you can have people who are well in their work and their lives, you'll be better off for it as an organization, and we will start to better tackle this mental health crisis that we're in. Humans are multifaceted in terms of it's not just our brain and our body, it's actually physical, mental, social, so our connectedness with other human beings, spiritual, which means many things to many people, but it is a very important element of all this, however it looks for a person, and then emotional. So these are 5 major components that make humans unique and complex. And if you're unwell in any of these, it can actually impact the others. Likewise, if you start to improve in one of these, it can actually help the others go better. And I think you might be able to relate to this. If you've gotten into shape, spent more time in your physical health, you'll probably feel that you are more positive overall emotionally, that you're sharper at thinking, maybe that you're sleeping better, which leads to sharper thinking. Maybe you have more motivation to get together with your friends because you're feeling more energy. The list goes on. I could talk for hours about all of these, but that's the gist of it, that we're humans who are whole humans. And work pre-pandemic actually wasn't roses and unicorns. The stuff on the left was what I was dealing with pre-pandemic from the inception of my career in psychology. From the early 2000s, I saw workplaces that were overwhelmed, people were anxious, challenged. It was a difficult environment in a lot of workplaces. It was not all great. And I think when we look back at pre-pandemic, sometimes we put on rose-colored glasses and say, oh, I wish it was back to the way it was. I wish we were all back to the office. I hear so many leaders say this, and I think it's actually not the right idea. The right idea is hybrid, which I will get into in a moment. But it's a chance to seize the moment, to reimagine work being better. I've been talking about this through the pandemic. I'm talking about this now, that work needs to be what's on the right, more fulfilling, more engaging, more aspirations are met through work, self-actualizing, and work can be something that brings joy and doesn't suck people dry. So in order to have this workplace of the future, which is now, so it's no longer the future of work in my mind, it's the evolution of workplaces now. And that includes mastering hybrid and flexible work. Now, hybrid work takes on various forms and shapes based on the industry. based on the organization, based on the location in the world. It's not a one-size-fits-all. But one thing's for sure, if you take flexibility away from people, you're taking away a very important part of their wellness and well-being. And I will say that till I'm blue in the face. And we know, we track the data. We've tracked the data through the pandemic. I'm tracking the data now. We know that people will leave organizations if flexibility is taken away. So this data is 54% say who are working remotely, at least some of the time, that they will withdraw from the work if they can no longer work remotely. So this is something organizations really need to keep in mind, but we're not all wired the same. Most of us, however, so let's say about 2/3 to 80% of us are a 2-3 day split. So 2 days at home, 3 days in an office, or 3 days home, 2 days office. So having a balance of home and office is a really great thing. It's the best of both worlds, and the latest label for that is hybrid. In office, the minority of people, absolutely function their best having an office for the structure, the routine. They do their best having a compartmentalization between home and workplace. And that's okay. That's okay too. But it's not as many as you'd think. Let's just say that it depends on the industry, but on average, let's just say about 10%. And then on the other extreme are the remote, the ones who are happy as can be being 100% remote. They do not miss going into an office. Again, maybe about 10%. Again, it very depends on the industry, but what I'm seeing is that most people, some sort of hybrid makes most sense from a personality and work style perspective. And that's based on our research over the last decade as organizational psychologists specializing in remote and distributed work. So the problem here, however, is management distrust. So latest Microsoft data from last year found that 85% of leaders are having trouble believing that their people are productive when they're working remotely. That's a problem. And in my mind, those leaders are not managing based on outcomes and performance. They're managing based on presenteeism. They need to focus more on what those people are working on versus are they actually working, or how much are they actually working. So it's more about quality and outcome versus quantity and butts and seats, which means a pivot from an old school style of leadership, command and control, which is these sorts of things. So can you see yourself in any of these things? And it's okay to see yourself. I mean, we all have our gaps and we all have things that we're working on as leaders. And if you think you're done developing as a leader, then you have a lot to work on. So those command and control leaders are very much into presenteeism. They're fear-based. They're scared people aren't working. They fear the worst in their people, so they must control their people. They demand returns to the office, and this has been all over the media. Goldman Sachs calls everybody back. This is called demand and control. So I'm not going to hear what you need. I'm not going to hear about you as a human being. I'm going to demand you're back at the office 100%. Elon Musk did the same thing. I keep on writing about it on my drlaura.live platform. I keep on being interviewed in the media because I believe it's important to stand up against this, because these types of leaders are not assessing and adjusting to their people. And I think that the jury will be out in the future on the impacts of that type of leadership. In contrast, true flexibility as leaders means being results-based, trust-based, so having strong trust in your people. And if you can't trust your people, you need new people. I have news for you. You got to hire people you trust. You got to manage and develop people that you trust. You need to consider the needs of the business and the human. It's a constant, both are very important. It's prioritizing both human and organizational success. You can't just drop your focus on the bottom line and the success of the company, but you cannot drop the focus on the human. You need to continually assess, reassess, and adjust. This is not a one and done. Okay, let's put them through this training program. Check, done. Leadership development, done. That's not true. It's an ongoing saga, and it's an ongoing climate engagement survey, pulse survey, and not only doing those things, but actually acting on the data, taking the data so seriously and having the courage to make tough decisions based on that data. And it's all about trust. During the pandemic, we had to trust people, so leaders said, you need to work at home, that's a mandate, and I'll trust you to do it. And then now they imply that that trust was misplaced. I shouldn't have trusted you. What does that tell your people? That tells your people it's time to look at updating their resume. That's what that tells them. You cannot treat people like children and teenagers. You're not running a school, you're running an organization. So hybrid work, and before pandemic it was called distributed work, agile work, flexible work, etc. Whatever it was called, I know that when it's done well, it's the best of both worlds. You get flexibility, you get the ability to save hours of commute time, you get rich, collaborative, creative time together on great days in the office that you spend as a team, and you get to really focus without the constant interruptions and costs of the commute. Again, it's not for everyone, but if it's led well, it tends to work well. If it's led poorly by command and control leaders, they're going to call everyone back to the office, and it'll be very painful leading up to that, especially for our HR folks who have really been through the ringer as the middle person in a lot of these decisions. In sum, to leave you with some thoughts today, it's easier to manage when everyone's under one roof. But is easier better? I don't think so. I think it's better to have flexibility and to upskill leaders to manage whole human beings and give them trust and flexibility. But it is harder. It is going to require extra effort. Next, presenteeism is not the same as performance. So butts in seats does not equal productivity. Someone can be at the office 10 hours a day and not be very productive. So keep that in mind. Hybrid requires a fundamental shift in management philosophy to leading humans versus leading resources, a fundamental shift. And the winners will be the quickest to adapt. So it'll be easier to pull everyone back to the office, but those that get very strategic about this, invest in developing, supporting, learning, continually being vulnerable to receiving the feedback. And when people leave, ask them why. But more importantly, ask them why before they leave. Ask them what would make them stay. Ask them how they're doing. Make sure your one-on-ones are sacred as a leader. I launched my podcast in 2020. It's year 3 now, and I've interviewed experts from around the world. I focus on where work meets life, so topics that are really important to this audience, but it's really around career fulfillment, helping organizations thrive, like I've talked about today, helping human beings thrive mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. And finally, it's about advocating for a better world, because our world needs lots of TLC right now. So that's where you'll find me, is at drlaura.live. This is my QR code. I love to connect on LinkedIn or in any other manner, and I really hope that you stay well and that you've learned a few nuggets that you can apply to your organization and your life. Thank you very much.